Good morning. Thank you. Hi, my name is Mike Prestridge, and I have the honor of sponsoring this executive panel, and I'm really honored to have these people up here, and had to twist some arms and get some folks on stage with us today, but no, really. We appreciate you taking your time. My company is Sanders & Warman, and briefly, we take care of building exteriors, painting, caulking, waterproofing, coatings, concrete floors, etc. That's the entire elevator pitch for now. If you need any of that stuff, come talk to me. Anyway, we are here to listen to these guys, and George Meyer has agreed to be our moderator for the second year. Repeat. Thank you, George. And we were fortunate with our conference subcommittee of Jeff Marquis and Ellen Ticknor right here to be able to put this panel together. So everybody enjoy. George, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. The bios of our panelists are actually on the website. They're actually not in your program, but I'm not going to spend the time going through all that. Let's just say that these guys are the leaders in the industry, and so what they say might be interesting. So that's how we're going to start. But I did want to say this is Tom Miller to my left, and then we have Mike Kent and Barry Altschuler, and then on the end, last but certainly not least, Chris Height. So with that, we're representing industrial, retail, office, and apartments. And a lot of the folks actually work in other areas as well, so we should have an interesting exchange of ideas here. So we first had a conversation together in a conference call, and maybe the first part of change, this is supposed to be about change and working through change, and we want to change that. So we're changing it to another word. So, and that was something that Tom brought up, and so what I'd like to ask Tom is, when we were discussing all that, you suggested a better word for change is disruption, and so could you kind of comment on that? What do you think?
Sure. So this morning, I don't know if anybody was listening to the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation in regard to Russia. 3 different times I heard the word existential threat. I'll be 62 next year, and this year, I cannot remember in my life going back to until the early 60s where that term existential threat was used. So you think about anxiety, you think about disruption, things are changing. Let me throw a couple of numbers at you. Real estate is 14% of the US GDP, and it's the largest industry by a pretty significant margin. It's the largest asset class, capital market, lending category, and store of consumer wealth in the United States. Real estate historically has been a very slow adapter to technology. Most industries spend 3 to 5% of their GDP on technology. We spend plus or minus 1/2 of 1%. There's 120 million homes with garages in the United States. 25,000 square miles of space in the United States, which is the size of West Virginia, is dedicated to parking. You listen to Gensler, and they're talking about autonomous vehicles and the implications that that has. So as you think about the garages that you manage, you think about the revenue that comes from cars. Pretty significant. A couple of other numbers. This was a study published by the UN Environmental Program. 40% of global energy is used by our industry. 25% of global water used by our industry. We're responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gases as an industry. You start to think, okay, what's the implications of that? Title 24. Who 2 years ago thought it would cost $10 a square foot to respond to the commissioning requirements of Title 24? California renewable energy requirements. By 2020, 1/3 of our electricity from renewable sources. By 2030, 50%. So you start thinking about your buildings, whether it's office, industrial, retail, multifamily, huge implications. A couple of thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tom. Chris, retail, huge disruption right now.
Absolutely. I would say retail, we arguably are the most disrupted of any of these sectors. We've been dealing with this little thing called the internet. You might have heard of it for the last 5 to 10 years. really trying to figure out what's the optimal mix or formula between retailers having online platforms and having their brick and mortar stores, and really honestly still trying to figure this out. Even the big guys, Walmart last month just announced that they were going to start offering 3 to 5% discounts if you will pick up your online purchases in the stores. And really that's a hedge for them against Amazon Prime, because Amazon Prime is absorbing that shipping cost. So if Walmart can get you to pick it up in the store, that's a competitive advantage. But it's also, they have a chance then to re-engage the customer, bring you into the store. I mean, who's ever walked into a Walmart with 2 kids and come out with anything less than $15 worth of candy and stuff? So it's pretty smart from that perspective. They're going to get incremental sales out of you as well. But this is 2017, and Walmart's just finally coming to this experiment and this conclusion, and we've been dealing with this for 5 or 10 years. So to your point, Tom, about slow responses, yeah, retail has been a slow responder to much of this disruption from the internet.
Barry, what do you think about it? Is disruption a good word?
I think disruption, we were talking about, and I was talking to Chris earlier, and I think this is really funny. In the New Yorker magazine, there was a cartoon of a girl selling Girl Scout cookies, and this couple walks by, and the wife says to the husband, "You can get those cheaper on Amazon." But I think that's funny, but it's telling too about the industry, about retail, and I think when one of the discussions we had when this panel was called "Change versus Disruption." Well, no, it was called Change, and we changed it to Disruption, because disruption is more than change. It's change on steroids. It's something that fundamentally alters how things are done, and that is what's happening in retail today. Retail is dramatically changing. It's not going to go away. It'll be smaller than it is today, than it is today, but it won't go away because some of us like shopping and we like eating out. And so some pieces of it will stay, but on the retail front, I was hearing about a mall in Seattle that's re-tenanting itself, and some of the new tenants are the Tesla store, which is a store they never thought to be selling Teslas at a mall, and Amazon is opening a bookstore. So these technology places are going into traditional retail space, which I think is interesting too.
Great. Mike, what do you think? Is disruption a good word?
Yeah, I mean, I work for a big box industrial company, and the interesting thing is we call now our big boxes big box retail guys, because we have the likes of Amazon in it. And it's amazing to go through. Yesterday I toured their facility with some of our folks from Australia that were in town, and the facilities manager was explaining to us that they are seriously exploring a blimp, if you will, to be their next warehousing agenda. So soon you'll have blimps flying over Los Angeles with drones delivering the Prime product. But who owns that real estate? Is that a disruptor coming to us soon? What happens with aviation? All this kind of stuff. If you don't think that's being seriously considered, it's coming. And how long? 3 to 5 years? Is it? We never thought Prime would take off the way it did. Now they're same-day delivery. So how does that change all segments of our business? Multifamily, is it something that how vertical do you go? What impact does that have on a high-rise in downtown Los Angeles if you live in a multifamily? So it's fascinating to see. I don't think any segment, you need to be on top of the markets and the changes in them, and figure out where this industry is going and be 2 feet in front of it. We can't be on the sidelines anymore.
Sounds like Blade Runner without rain.
Right? Yeah. Right.
So let's kind of talk a little bit more about the politics and the economy. And as we discussed, there's a number of issues at the national, state, and local level that all have tremendous impact on our industry. Some of them are the biggest ones that we were talking about on the call were the split roll tax, more stringent rent control, hostility to development like Prop M that was in San Francisco, Prop S in LA, and the large gas tax increase. Mike, Do you think many of these will devastate small business? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because there's two different agendas going on. We can see one in the White House and we can see one here in California. I was on a panel not that long ago and somebody said, you know what, California's become to what Trump was as Texas is to Obama. It's the pain in the behind. And we now have, for the first time in, I think, 40 plus years, a supermajority, which means that pretty much anything could pass in the House here in the state, and it could be just to prove a point. So, and that's very dangerous to small business and our business as a whole. So I think that's one of them. I think split roll for the first time could be a very serious issue, which is the fact of the separation between Prop 13 protection for for personal residence versus commercial real estate. Meaning, could you imagine if your real estate taxes doubled in a year? Try to explain that to your customers. That's going to be an interesting, because you're going to pass it through. What does that do to your small business customers? It's not just an impact, it could be monumental. And then there's a ton of little things going on right now, like the, the pets, bringing pets to work. I was in the airport the other day and somebody brought a German Shepherd on the plane. I'm sorry, but a comfort dog is one thing. A great, big German Shepherd sitting next to you on a plane is, and I'm sitting there on the line going, please don't sit next to me. Please. It used to be the big heavy person that you're like, oh, how do we share a seat? But now I'm sharing with a dog. So there's a lot of things happening in California that you should be actively working on and protecting your properties and your customers and your clients.
Barry, rent control?
Rent control, yeah.
Well, I'm on the multifamily side, and I don't think there is a bigger issue in front of all of us, because all of us live in apartments or know people who live in apartments or have children who live in apartments. And I think we also know that in California, especially, there's a shortage of housing, a massive shortage of housing in the state. And that's why rents go up so much. That's why housing prices go up so much every year in California, more than almost anywhere else in the country, because we are undersupplied relative to the jobs we create. So rent control is something that's passed in a few municipalities already. Certain places have it, like Los Angeles, but only on older buildings, Beverly Hills. In Mountain View, it was passed this year, capping rent increases, which might sound good to all of you, but what really makes markets work is good old supply and demand. And so when you limit the supply of something and the demand is great, you will have an excessive amount of rent growth. But if you cap it, you won't add units because developers won't have an incentive to build. If rents are capped at, say, CPI or 2%, there isn't an incentive for people to build new housing. So if bills come up, and they're in California, there's what's called Costa-Hawkins. I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but it is a state law that prohibits rent control on apartments built after 1995. There was a bill introduced this year to repeal Costa-Hawkins. It died, but it will be introduced next year, because next year, is a big election cycle. It's likely to be on the ballot. We have the governor up for election next year, and repealing Costa-Hawkins would allow municipalities to institute rent control on all properties, not just pre-1995 properties. That would be a very bad thing for our business. That would stall development. And so you would not be increasing the supply of housing that's needed. And the other thing is, and just for people who aren't really educated about rent control is in a lot of cities around the United States, and New York probably is the best example, but it never helps the people it's intended to help. What happens is people get into these apartments and they stay in them for 40 years. They become millionaires because their cost of housing is limited to $700 a month, because that's what the rent control laws allowed for what today would be a $10,000 a month apartment. So rent control is bad policy. It doesn't help the people it's supposed to help, and it does not increase the supply of housing. So I just wanted to make sure that message is out there, and spread the word if people ask you about it. Thank you.
Let us know what you really think, Barry.
And you have the Airbnb factor, which people on rent control are using their units as rental
Yeah,
income.
that's interesting. So now you have a rent-controlled unit that's supposed to be for a lower income person that they're renting out as a hotel room and really profiting from. You know, and I go back and forth on Airbnb because, you know, we don't allow subleases, but the advantage to us with Airbnb is that the more income somebody makes on their apartment, the more rent they were willing to pay me. So, you know, it's. But I think, well, can I just say one more thing about that? Because I think this is a disruptor. Airbnb is a disruptor. And, you know, in our industry and in the hotel industry, you have to learn to deal with disruptors. We can't just say we don't allow sublets, we're not going to deal with Airbnb, because we may lose residents because of that. They may go to another company that does allow it or that works with Airbnb. So I think with these disruptors, you have to figure out how to work with them because they are here. It is a fact. And one way we could work with Airbnb is to work with them. You know, we could allow sublets through Airbnb and then profit share with them. So there are ways to do it. And you can limit the number of days a year or a month that you allow that to happen. So there are ways to manage these things.
Thanks. Tom, any thoughts on what you think is the worst thing in the economy or in politics that we should be thinking about with regards to disruption?
So I think life is in balance. And I want to read some facts really quick to you on what I would call the liability side, and then some thoughts on the asset side. Social Security needs $3.7 trillion to meet future liabilities. Medicare needs $22 trillion to fund future liabilities. Global restructuring in Europe, the Middle East, tensions, conflicts, infrastructure. They say it's $1 trillion. A friend of mine runs the public infrastructure bond business for Goldman on the West Coast. He said we should be spending 3 to 4% a year of GDP on infrastructure, and we spend an order of magnitude on that. So a giant kicking of the can. Healthcare, $2 trillion, federal deficit, 20. I mean, you could kind of keep going, but then I look at it and I go, okay, what's on the other side? And it's my 4 T's. We've got incredible talent in this state. We have incredible transportation in this state. We have incredible tolerance. If you think about the diversity of this community, it's extraordinary. And then lastly, we got great transportation. So there's a lot of really good things going on. The threat in some regards is to big business. But this country and this state and this region were built on small businesses. And there's a lot of entrepreneurialism, and those T's support the entrepreneurialism that supports the small business. So I think everything is in a pretty good place of balance. I worry about some of the existential issues.
So there was one, you said transportation twice. Was there another T?
Transportation, talent, tolerance, technology.
Technology, there you go.
You sort of look around and
It's
you
a big
go,
T.
you know, take your pick. Silicon Beach, Silicon Forest, Silicon Valley. But it's really quite extraordinary. If you think about how much this has changed your life, I go to my office a half a day a week now. I'm 24/7 on this, and we'll talk a little bit later about how these have changed your life. This is 4G. Stay tuned, folks. When we go to 5G, the world's going to change big time.
Good, thank you. Change for our customers, and Barry, you may have already taken a little bit of your thunder, but we were talking about the change of pace, disruption for our residents, our customers, tenants, guests, and it seems to be speeding up. There's new ways to buy products, to work, travel, and relax, Uber and Airbnb, which you just mentioned. But Barry, most people don't immediately think that disruption is as big in the apartments. And you were just talking about Airbnb. What do you think?
Yeah, I think disruption is big in life. And it certainly affects the multifamily industry. You know, Airbnb is a big disruptor. Uber has really changed the game, and not just for our business. You know, because Uber is step one of moving towards Uber via autonomous vehicles, and that might sound like it's far away, but it's not. You know, I think the first thing you're going to see is long-distance trucking, with 30% of trucking costs is payroll for people to do it, and that's already very close to happening. Long-distance truck via autonomous vehicle, no driver. So, what that means for all of us, you know, and I think people know, but there's a generation now that doesn't really care about owning cars. They don't get their driver's license on their birthday like I did, and they, you know, they don't care. They don't care about it. It's not something that is high on their list because of things like Uber. And so, you know, in the future, you won't own a car. You will just Uber your autonomous vehicle, and it won't need a place to park. So now we talked about the parking garages and things, and we're trying to figure out what to do with all our parking garages, because they're, you know, we have less and less demand for them. We opened 3 buildings in San Francisco in the last 2 years, and only 50% of our residents are taking parking. Our pro forma assumed we'd have more demand than spaces, but that's not the case. So now we're thinking, you know, so you have to think differently about how you build a parking garage today, because you want it to be convertible to something else like warehousing or something in the future. So,
Well, wait a minute.
yeah.
It's retail guys.
Oh,
could
yes.
use more
Like it,
parking.
yeah.
And I'm encouraged to hear this, because as we've seen restaurants and fitness kind of answer the question to these defunct boxes, certainly parking, and we've all experienced it as we're out there shopping, like you can't find a parking space anywhere. You know, you were just talking about Uber. You know, some shopping center owners are starting to embrace Uber as both as a partner to make sure that there's Uber available in an area, and some are outright paying
Yes.
you know, a certain dollar amount in peak times at certain seasons for folks to be dropped off and to shop via Uber. But this idea of parking and excess parking in residential is something I hadn't thought about until now, so we should probably talk. Because
We should.
because as retail guys, we're constantly thinking to ourselves, where the heck do we get more parking? And there's not an easy answer.
The community.
Mike, Tom, anything you want to share?
You know, the only thing in the industrial sector, I would say, is that education and the minimum wage jobs are at risk in the warehousing industry. Going through these warehouses, these big box industrial warehouses, is amazing these days. Everything is automated, even down to the forklifts. I mean, there are forklifts that you have right-of-ways, and they're geared by GPS, and it goes retrieve something, and it's not necessarily just go and pick and pack, and some of that's been automated over the last few years, but when the forklift jobs are gone, and they're coming soon, you know, we had our little group on the tour yesterday had to give right-of-way to all these forklifts that was in, and there was nobody on them. We're like, okay. And there's little stop signs for the employees versus the forklift driver, right? So you're like, how's this work? And you look up, and there's GPS detectors throughout the entire building. So, you know, educating the segment of the minimum wage employee is going to be critical for them to stay employed moving forward, because their jobs are at risk moving forward. So education, I think, is a big issue, and one that needs to be focused in on. It's not necessarily a disruptor, but technology is coming in, chasing those jobs. So I guess that's a disruptor.
Absolutely. Tom, anything you want to add before we move on? Okay.
No, go.
We really wanted to take it also down to changes for you in the audience. We talked about some of the challenges. It affects us in our professional life. What are the most important changes that you all have that, and what can you do to grow and flourish? How should we be thinking about all this? Chris, you shared some thoughts about how our audience should not freak out about all of this, and could you elaborate a little bit
Well,
more
hopefully
about
everyone's
that?
not freaking out, but you know, I want to suggest that maybe real estate's slow response to technology and the like is because fundamentally real estate is not about apps and technology, it's about people, and you really can't take that element out of what us as operators of real estate actually do. I don't think we're going to see in our lifetime redundancy for us in what we do in being really the nexus, coordinating your clients, your owners, your customers, your tenants, your vendors, your contractors, your architects. We as operators, that all flows, through us. And so, be encouraged that there's still a role for you. This is still a vibrant, career. Retail is not dead. It's not dying. It's going to change, and it's going to find a way to change, but it's going to require, managers to operate. And I was watching a movie this weekend. I don't know if you guys have seen the film Hidden Figures. And there's a part in there where it's basically these women were acting as computers at NASA in the 60s, and they heard this IBM mainframe is going to put them out of business. And Kevin Costner, at the same time, he's running the show, and he says to this woman, you have to look beyond the numbers. In other words, you have to think. It's not just the rudimentary. And I think that there's an application to us that as managers, and in particular with numbers, we have to look just beyond just the day-to-day tasks of blocking and tackling, responding to tenant things, collecting rents, doing that sort of stuff. We have to ourselves look beyond the numbers. And I'll give an example from my sector in retail. Sometimes I'll get a sales report. We track monthly sales, generally speaking, for our tenants, an important metric on the viability and the health of our tenants. And sometimes I'll get a report, and every single sales report has been collected. The manager's like, look how great that looks. I'm like, what does it mean? That's great. Every tenant submitted their sales report this month, but that's not our job. That's really what's expected. What we need to be doing is looking at those numbers and really analyzing and saying, where are the trends? What does that mean? I can guarantee you what it says in retail in many areas is it says food is back to sales that were pre-recession numbers, which means food rents need to be and should be at pre-recession numbers if they're not already. And we can look at a center, and you might be operating a center that's operating at, say, $2 a foot for your average tenant. But your food guys are killing it. They might need to be at $4. So you might be going to your owner and saying, look, I know our market rent's X, but for this category, for these guys right here that we're renewing, we ought to really be trying to push this. That's not going to be automated. That's what we do as thinking through, not just getting the numbers, analyzing the numbers, and then having an opinion about them and communicating them to our owners and actioning on them. So that's my encouragement for the group that we still have a vital role.
Mike, you were talking about in politics and getting involved, kind of affecting change. You want to
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 points I would like to make. One is being involved. Split roll taxes I'll hit again, only because that's probably the biggest threat, and it's probably the biggest opportunity we've ever had to have it passed. And it's been coming up for years. It shows up every couple of years and it dies before it makes a house. This year, there's probably the biggest threat we've ever had. So educating your owners, educating yourself, your owners, on that specific issue is huge, huge, and the impacts of that. Second is, how many people have ever done a port tour of the ports of LA or Long Beach? If you don't think the ports of Los Angeles are combined one of the biggest economic booms for this economy, you have no idea. Educating yourself on the ports, the impacts of shutdowns at the port, the impacts of legislation on the ports is amazing. That affects every segment of real estate here. It's one of the biggest drivers we've ever had, and it's kind of a sleeping giant, but a big threat to our economy. All the ports do free tours. It's fascinating to hear the facts and figures of what comes through the port, what the volume of it is, and how all the economic gains of it. So I'd invite each of you to take that tour. It's free. They do them on weekends as well. But it's fascinating, but one that you really should know what's happening at the port. I get newsletters every quarter because I live in Long Beach, but I get them from the city, but I bring them into the office. It's probably as opposed to all the brokerage literature, it's probably the #1 thing that's read in our office. It's pretty interesting, and you can go online and get it. But I would say, educate yourself on that one issue. And when there's a threat of a union issue at the port, watch it, read it, hear about it, educate your landlords about it, your customers about it. So anyway, those are my 2.
Oh, thank you. Tom, you were talking about what people should be doing to make them look more attractive in in their professional and employment history. Do you want to talk a little bit about those kinds of things?
Sure. We had the head of our IT group come in and talk to us at a leadership retreat. We do a couple of these every year. Let me throw a couple of thoughts that were on the forefront of IT's thoughts, and this impacts what you all do. Corporate real estate venture capital firms. There's now 4,500 companies looking at technology, whether it's apps, kind of take your pick, but the changes that are going on. So familiarize yourself with what's going on in the venture capital side of our business. Cybersecurity. Humans are the single biggest weak point. You think about phishing, you think about whaling, you think about all the conversations. Was the election manipulated by the Russians? But all the things that are going on. And the primary concern right now is breach of systems. So when you listen to what CEOs are talking to their boards about quarterly, they're reporting out now on cybersecurity. And the building systems are the most valuable. So, it's great that we all have these and your customers doing the hot and cold. But what happens if somebody busts your system, it's 84 degrees out, and they turn the heater on and it's 95 degrees out? Your business is about reputation. It's about customer experience. So a really big thing to be aware of. Let me hit a couple of others really quick. The cloud, the impact of the cloud. Servers. All the server space that you have in your buildings. It's gone. Everything's gone to the cloud. Mobile apps. The implications, they're going to continue to proliferate. How you curate your customer experience. So for us, we've spent a lot of time looking. We were overly asset-centric. And we pivoted and said, if we don't create great customer experience, we're going to die. And I think that's what everybody has to do. And we've spent a bunch of time focusing on the customer journey, the value proposition of what you offer. So personally, focus on how you curate experience and focus on how you understand your value proposition and your organization's value proposition. So, those are a couple of thoughts. One of the things that I do, these phones can be your friend and they can be your enemy. We have a friend my kids are all between 26 and 33, but the phones all get laid down at dinner. We shut them off. Make sure you create quiet time for yourself. Make sure you read. I read a book recently. We did it as a part of our leadership team. Has anybody read Boys in the Boat? Okay, if you haven't read it, go buy the book. If you don't like it, call me. I will pay for the book. I'm serious.
What's your number, Tom?
555-1212. Let me just read you really quick. These are the 5 key traits. Boys in the Boat is the story of the University of Washington's Olympic rowing team. And these were a bunch of folks from all over Washington. We're in the middle of the Depression. Here were the 5 key traits that these people had. Perseverance, mutual trust and respect, the ability to focus, earnestness. And it was done in pride in what they did, not individual pride about who they were. And last, humility and the belief that they can do things better together than they can do independently. And when they were talking about what was success, success wasn't the gold medal. Success was not letting their colleagues down. So when you think about the traits that make you better and your personal value proposition and your organizational value proposition, what are those key values that you're sustaining and pushing?
Okay.
More than you wanted to know, but there you go.
Great. Thank you, Tom. We have time for one more question to the panel here, and it's probably, for me, the most interesting because when I asked this to them individually, several of them said, I'm not really sure, I'll have to think about it. So that's always good. So we'll see what we get. What's the one thing that the change of pace and the disruption it's caused change your life professionally and or personally? So I'll just throw it out and anybody can jump in.
I'll start. Speed of information. I think about 10 years ago, when people wanted things, they wanted them tomorrow, the next day, by Friday. Today, it's if you don't respond within the hour, And it's expected, and we do it ourselves. So we put real unrealistic deadlines on others. But the speed of information and how you manage that is probably one of the biggest changes that everybody needs to adapt to and continue to adapt to, because it's always there. One thing on technology as well is I absolutely agree. But one of the things that also you should have on your phone, how many people track their stock value of their 10 to 15 clients, customers, on their phone? If you don't know what your customer's value is every day and what's affecting them, and getting a alert on, gee, this customer's our biggest customer income-wise, and they just had their stock devalued by 50%,
You probably want
you want to know that information before your boss does. So, little things like that. But those are the advantages. That's where you can really excel, and you don't have to do anything. Just set it up and be done with it. But, I think placing realistic timelines on people and the speed of information, I think everybody, putting your phone on the table is one thing, but actually being a part of that community and part of your company on delivering realistic deadlines is critical.
Chris, what do you think? You look like you're lost in thought.
Yeah,
So that was-
I'm lost in thought. No, it's trying to frame my response in, I would just say I think that we all need to continue to be students. I think that's the answer to disruption. And one of the things that we often look to, and you might be asking yourselves, I don't have this great property that I can create this great experience, and I can curate my tenants. I kind of have this B-class asset, and it kind of does this, and what have you. But there are issues that you deal with every day that you may not be able to answer. And the answer may not be within your organization. You need to be a student. So every single place that I go, drive my wife crazy, every center that I go to, I'm constantly looking at everything. If I'm in an Irvine Company property, what are they doing? Where do they put their trash cans? I know this sounds like really silly stuff, but if you're a manager, these are the kind of things that you think about, right? And you're like, how did they address this issue? So sometimes it takes the humility of I don't know it all. As an operator, my colleagues that I work with may not know, but somebody has figured this out. And by studying, learning, and constantly being a student wherever you are, you can take back little thoughts that can improve if just incrementally your site, you might see that someone's offering, that's kind of cool how they handled that parking in front of that high-use tenant. They did kind of a combination of 15-minute parking, but they've got this sign here, and it's those that be a student of that sort of thing and bring it back to your own centers and experiment with it and be talking to your owners about things that you've seen and ideas, because ideas and being a student is how you deal with disruption. That's how you don't become a victim.
Well, Chris, if you find a trash can out of
Yeah, I'll let
alignment
you
at
know.
Irvine, please let me know.
I'll let you know.
Barry, your thoughts?
No. Well, when Chris was talking, I was thinking how much fun he is on date night.
Oh, yeah.
But I know how that is because I've done the same thing, going out to dinner and it's like, on the way, can we stop and look at a building, So I get it. I do think that's important. Everything, one of the biggest investments you can make is just making what you have better. And every single thing that you have, there's some tweak that you can do, and it might be the trash can placement.
Amen.
So
It's in the details.
I think that's right. Be a student of how other people do things, because there are a lot of good, successful companies that are at the top of the list. So look at them and say, what are they doing, and what should we be doing differently? I also think there are going to be, we should be optimistic, because technology and this disruption, it makes lives better. It gives you more time to do things. And it actually expands a lot of businesses. The ride-share business that Uber started is 5-10 times bigger than the taxi cab business ever was. And online shopping has expanded business, not detracted from it. So there's every reason to be optimistic, but at the same time, and what Chris was saying, you've got to stay educated, and because things change, and the job or what you were doing yesterday may not be needed anymore. Those truck drivers, those warehouse forklift operators, they have to find something else to do. And I think, independent of waiting around for that to happen, stay on top of what's happening and figure out, what your next move is. It's not today, but just keep that in mind and stay educated.
Thank you. And I saved Tom for last because he won our best socks of the panel,
He did. He did.
if you haven't seen it. So, your thoughts?
My family never knows what to buy me, so they buy me fun socks. You know, Wayne Gretzky, when asked why was he successful, said, I skated to where the puck is going to be. I didn't skate to where the puck is. And I think that each of us, individually, collaboratively, organizationally, you need to think about what is your outlook. So where do you think we're going to be 7 to 10 years out? And then set up a personal strategic plan and corporate plan that says, okay, what strategies, goals, priorities, and measurable outcomes am I going to do in the next 3 years to allow myself to skate to where the puck's going to be? And all of it is dependent upon learning. Grow or die.
Great, thank you. Well, we actually have time for, where's my, yeah, how much time? A couple minutes? A couple minutes. So, thank you, panelists. And I would like to open it up for questions from anybody. Here's.
I have two. One is, what do you think the impact of the last mile is going to be on real estate, last mile logistics? So that was first. And then the second one was big box retail that's going out of business. The Sears, the JCPenney, the sports facilities. How do you think that those will be configured and used? And how is that going to impact retail?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so the first one was the last mile issue.
Last mile logistics.
And then secondly, what do we do with the big box, empty big boxes? So, Chris,
Well, I
I'm
mean,
looking at you.
I can't speak articulately to the last mile. I'll let the industrial guys talk about that. But in terms of big box, you know, I think ultimately some of that product is going to end up in Barry's shop as
New apartment building.
as residential. And
Yes.
and that's not to say retail won't be a fundamental component of that. This whole mixed use thing, I think, is going to continue as we see densities just getting denser and denser, population going up. I mean, just look at our freeways. My gosh, Orange County used to be like fresh place to drive. Now it's more and more like LA, right? So it's getting denser, and so those boxes, ultimately, the large pieces of real estate, they really can't be solved for by slicing it into, you know, a 24-hour fitness and a few restaurants. That stuff's going to end up, I think, residential. It's going to go vertical.
Last mile is basically the Amazon get it to your house in 24 hours, if people don't know what that is. It's changed the core of LA pricing, especially in logistics and mid-sized boxes. What they do is they'll have their big warehouses in the Inland Empire, 1 million square foot, and then they bring a 40 to 50,000 square foot product out. Everything is still sorted in the major warehouses, and then that day is sent to a small, and believe it or not, it's handed to an Uber driver to deliver to your front door many times. It's not by FedEx or UPS anymore. So what it's done is really taken the core of LA industrial, which is losing, if you think about it, a lot of the product also has been ground up and converted to multifamily or high-rise office buildings. So the base is shrinking, but the rental rates are going up. There is nothing but sticker shock to customers in the LA market. Rents have gone from mid-50s in core mid-cities, Santa Fe Springs, to pushing 80 cents a square foot. If you don't think there's a day where we, as a threat to the economy, is start losing these major customers outside the state because of the rental growth, it's the product is, for last mile, I think the small industrial buildings in the core markets are going to be worth their weight in gold moving forward. So from an investment standpoint, they become very prime. But there's only so many customers that use those. There's a handful. It's going to be the big box retailers and the online stores, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Comments? Other questions? Last chance. Go ahead.
How much of the topics we're talking about today are California-centric versus national?
The question is, how much of this that we're talking about is California-centric, or is it national?
I think it's international.
Yeah.
but we're not talking about split tax rolls in Texas necessarily, but these issues, it's a global economy. So these are all international issues that are being dialogued by professionals like us in Japan and
Yep. Agreed.
I agree. I mean, I was just had the opportunity to be in Panama City that I knew nothing about, and I was completely and utterly flabbergasted by a vibrant downtown and an old town that's being completely regentrified into mixed-use retail, office, just like you'd see here in Los Angeles. So I do believe that what you're talking about is international.
how many people have lived internationally in this room? Raise your hand. 20%? Go live internationally. I'm totally serious. Change your way you look at things.
Good. There was a question in the back.
Yes, Tom, you gave out some amazing statistics. Can we get those again?
Sure. How about if I get them to somebody instead of boring everybody here with those again?
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Any thoughts on urban agriculture and on top of urban agriculture, agriculture in industrial warehousing, which is
Wow.
starting to happen?
Grow the weeds.
So are you talking about marijuana?
Sandy, what are we
That
talking
was
about?
Jeff Marquis, just so everyone knows.
Do you have your card, first of all? Is your card updated?
I went to college of Cal Poly Pomona, which is an agricultural school.
yeah.
And ULI is big on urban agriculture right now. They're pushing agriculture. Orange County is rooted in agriculture. That's where that question comes from.
I know him. Jeff got us way off in the weeds. I know.
So I'll throw a curveball at you. What do you think the biggest farm is in the world? It's the ocean. It's the untapped opportunity. Go to the website for a project called Alta Sea in the port of San Pedro. Really very interesting. We haven't even tapped that opportunity.
Anybody else?
I mean, for industrial, it hasn't been an impact. Obviously, marijuana has been, but that's a whole different issue. And that's actually an impact for all. We were talking with Ellen Tickner the other day, is, you know, are there going to be, outside an office building, do you have smoke areas? Are you going to have a grass lounge and a smoke area? How's that impact office buildings? That's going to be an interesting one. But that said, it really hasn't impacted industrial, but I think in major metropolitans in the next probably 10, 15 years, it will become a factor. We also have climate change and protection of the agricultural industry. They're going to figure a way out to put it under a roof soon. So I think that will happen. Today, land is plentiful and it's free, especially in the Midwest. So but I think it's down the road. It will be happening.
We've got to wrap it up, I think. So let's give a big hand, please.